Welcome back to another Lumix Creators Podcast. In today's episode, we are talking to Jake Felzen, which is the Final Cut Pro and Davinci Resolve editing expert. Now, Jake and I go a while back from 2019 when I was watching and commenting on his YouTube videos about the GH5, but since then he transitioned to the Sony a7 III. He went through a black magic phase with the pocket cameras. Then he trans back to Lumix using the S5, and now he just recently purchased the S5 II. But more or less in this style of the stories, we're gonna give some context about how he got into YouTube, the different phases and seasons he went through, Final Cut versus Davinci Resolve, which one his favorite personal editing software, and what Final Cut Pro would need to do for him to ditch Davinci Resolve, and much, much more in this conversation. Without further ado, let's get right into the topic. Even though I gave you a little bit of introduction to yourself, give my audience just a little bit of introduction, who you are, what you do. Tell them all the good stuff that you do.
Yes, Matthew. Hey, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm so excited to get to chat with you. Yeah, you did a great summary. I think I've been a lot of things in my life, but I think this current phase of just production, post-production, editing, music is probably what I was subconsciously working towards this whole time and just didn't realize it. I love camera stuff. I love all of that. But yeah, right now it's just all about great edit. How do you tell a great story? And obviously music is a big part of that. So there's pieces of that too. But yeah, that's probably kind of my spiel for right now.
I feel like a lot of filmmakers nowadays love the filming side of the process, but there's not a ton of people, and there is a ton of people out there that love the editing side of the process. So what was that transition like from being all techie and nerdy about cameras and camera gears and lenses, and then where did you see this love for editing come into your own life and all of that side?
No, it's a great question. It's so funny because it really was kind of forced upon me externally. I think I've always loved editing, and that goes back to just my music roots of GarageBand, track-based editing, making all the different instruments and editing them together. That's sort of my first love, and was just something I was kind of that weird kid in high school that definitely played video games, but I was the music kid, I'm so behind on a lot of Halo references because when everyone was playing Halo, I was doing music.
That's funny.
But then I really got into the camera space, which I think we'll talk about probably at some point today, and loved that. Really enjoyed it. Was all about it. And then my son was born, and life just happens, and you lose the ability to just do so many things doing that. And I love being a dad, so it's not like I have any regrets, definitely not saying that, but just didn't have time to get out and go shoot stuff like I did. And there was moments, but not enough to have a consistent channel and kind of be creatively fulfilled. And so I saw TMS Productions was posting for an editing job, and I applied to be their editor at the time. And just kind of realized going through that process, they hired me. I worked for them for quite a while. Really enjoyed it. I still love so many of the videos that I edited for them, and it was such a great place to learn. Just kind of realized within myself, oh, I really do love this part. This is my favorite part, and I definitely love the filming side, the photography side, but just editing is my true calling, at least right now. And I think that will continue because I think that has been there the whole time. And I just discovered that, especially with them being hey, we need to hire someone to do this. And I was kind of oh, I thought you just kind of had to do that because you had to. Whereas they were no, we just don't really like this part. And I'm oh, that's my favorite part. Of course I'll come do that for you. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, was just wanting to have a creative outlet that I could do at home. And that's sort of what kicked it off.
So what was that process like, applying for TMS Productions, becoming their editor, kind of working for them? And then how did that transition to also starting to work with a bunch of other YouTubers? And I know we talked before off the mics, but you worked with a bunch of YouTubers like Jesse James, you had Dunna Did It, there's obviously TMS, Patrick, I don't know how to pronounce the last name, Patrick Tomeza. Is that right?
Tommaso, I believe, if I'm saying it right.
You better be saying it right. You worked for him. Also, Jimmy the barista, which that sounds fun.
Yep.
So what was
Yep.
that like? What was the process of starting to work with TMS? How did that whole process start? And then transition that into telling us what that was like and how that starting to work with all these other filmmaking related YouTube channels and then also non-filmmaking related YouTube channels. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, where do I start with that? I think so with TMS, um, the big well, okay, so how let's I guess take it back to how I got the job. So funny enough, they just posted the job on Instagram, and I think I would tell anyone who's looking to work with other creators, like it sounds silly and it's kind of a weird timing thing, but like so many people just use their socials to post jobs, collaboration type stuff. And again, if you like that person or want to work with that person, just wait, just be patient and keep your eyes peeled. And that's really like how I've gotten most of my gigs throughout it. And so, yeah, they just post on their story. They were like, hey, we're hiring for an editor. We need some help with editing. And I just sent my info with my channel and some of the stuff I'd been doing in the past, which was all my stuff. I hadn't done any client work yet. And yeah, got the gig. So like the application process was pretty easy. Met, interviewed, chatted, and the first project we worked on was like something client related for it. They were making a course for, I'm not sure if I can say who, probably can. But it was put on by I think Epidemic and NAS Academy. And so it wasn't even for their YouTube channel, right? It was like something completely on the side. And just through that whole process, which was trial by fire, because I'd never done anything that big or long before, and I was just winging it the whole way through. And I told them I was good at Davinci Resolve, which at the time I definitely was good. I quickly realized I was not good enough for the project that they wanted. And so I was learning on the job the whole way. Yeah, it was so funny how that all panned out. But I mean, again, just like I tell anyone, just do your best to learn as you go, because that's the secret to life.
I feel like that's most job situations where it's just like,
Dude.
can you do X, Y, and Z? You say yes, and then you show up learning, like watching like a 30-minute video beforehand.
Yes, dude. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it was really great. And then after that, they basically were like, hey, we really liked working with you. Would you be at all interested in doing some YouTube stuff? And I was like, of course, yeah, that sounds, and it was way more fun. I was like, yeah, I'll definitely do that. And yeah, we still used DaVinci at that time. Really polished a lot of my skills on those videos, learning, some more fusion stuff, how to do a little bit of color grading. We weren't huge on that with their channel, which was kind of fun, or they would do some of it. And then, yeah, just like from there, basically similar story, like keeping my eyes peeled, whether it's on YouTube jobs or Instagram or whatever, and just kind of seeing if there's anyone else that needs help with editing and reaching out and doing that. And that's like basically everyone after that has been that same story and just using each one as reference stuff.
No,
Yeah.
that's super cool. And I would love to dive into seeing, were you doing DaVinci Resolve for all your editing YouTube projects with other YouTubers, or were you using Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, or was it just all DaVinci?
It depends. It depends. Actually, so typically for client work, I find myself leaning towards Resolve, which we can get into. But generally speaking, I find that the more polished a video can be is typically, that was a terrible way to phrase it, but I find that I can get a video to a polished quality much easier with Resolve. So when I say polished, I'm talking about the audio mix, the color mix, and motion graphics. Like all three of those, like the kind of the last 10% really can shine with so much less effort, in my opinion, in Resolve. The cutting experience, which again we'll probably get into, I much prefer Final Cut still to this day, and I've learned lots of ways to try to make Resolve feel better. But that's a lot of the reason I lean towards client work, is I feel like those things definitely matter, and that's where I want to save time, is kind of in the stuff around the bones, right? That being said, I have definitely chosen Resolve for a couple of client projects, and I think that I maybe didn't get asked back because they probably would have preferred Final Cut. And I thought for some reason Resolve was going to be better. And for that particular project, it wasn't. And if there's anything I've learned and would tell people is if you do know both, it's great. But it's just as much a skill to like really try to hone in on what people want, right? Because some people want you to just edit it. They don't care what you use, make it however you want, and they'll just give you notes and you go do those notes and they just care about the final render. But especially in our space, a lot of people want their fingers in the kitchen somehow, whether that's color grading, maybe they want to change the music, maybe they want to do this. And it's just easier for them to do that last 2%, which I've had pretty common in my experience. When I picked Resolve and they use Final Cut and then they're trying to do that, it becomes a huge headache, right? And so I would say to anyone, probably one of my most basic tips is just like ask someone if you're starting to work for them, like what do they use? If you know both, if you know multiple, like what do they use? Because for those first few videos, and maybe forever, just depending on how the relationship goes, they might take that project file at the end and want to change some stuff. And I've had that a lot of times. And again, the few times that I didn't do my due diligence to make sure and get that right, it bit me because I was like, okay, well, it sounds like they just want editing. I'm picking this one for me. And then it was like, oh, but then they wanted to change this and they didn't want to do the whole back and forth. And then they didn't, and then they couldn't basically, or it was a huge headache. And so yeah, there's been times I should have used Final Cut.
And I feel like there's also advantages to telling, clients or YouTubers, like, these are the editing systems that you're proficient in. Maybe this is like the number one that you are an expert in, maybe number two, maybe number three if need be. But then, like you said, it's an easy question to ask YouTubers and people that you are doing editing gigs. What platform do you prefer me to edit this on? Especially maybe if you are slower in Davinci Resolve or Final Cut, and if you're using Premiere Pro, then you're going to get very upset later on in this podcast. But if you are using those systems and you're a little bit slower at like one system or the other, but your client at the end of the day does want, those hands in the kitchen, maybe they want to make some edits and cuts and they prefer one system over the other, it provides a huge advantage, to that client, to the YouTuber, if you know and you're proficient at a bunch of different softwares and settings. So what was a typical workflow then for you, Jake, for say if it was for Final Cut Pro or Davinci Resolve? Now I know Davinci Resolve has a lot more bells and whistles when it comes to collaborating with teams. I don't know if you used any of those collaborations where it's like someone could be cutting while someone's doing sound work or color grading or doing different things simultaneously on a project. Whoa. Give me a second.
Mic down.
Anyways, back into the conversation. So what's that workflow for you for Davinci Resolve and Final Cut, from raw footage all the way to exporting the final video?
Yeah, there's been lots of different workflows, and I can kind of give a high level of the different flavors and how that looks and my opinions on some of them. For Final Cut, well, for really any project except for one instance with Resolve, which I'll talk about, but for the most part, and I think this is pretty standard, especially in our space, footage is shot client side, and then Dropbox, Google Drive, any of the cloud hosting services is where it's got to go. And then I got to download it and start putting it into a project file. So kind of like you talked about for a Final Cut edit, it is definitely a lot harder to collaborate with people. If not, I've never used a setup where that was even possible because it's just not really designed for that. Yeah. So for Final Cut, usually it was like I'd work on I'd download the footage, make the project file or the library or whatever the case may be, edit it to whatever stage, complete, whatnot, render, if that's get notes, do the notes in Final Cut, or maybe at that point I'm sending that library or project file and then they can relink everything on their end or whatever the case may be. for that same exact workflow that's very similar in Davinci, which is what I did with most clients up to this day, is like, hey, it's a DRP, Davinci Resolve project file, which is just a big XML file for the project. It's super small, so it's just like this text file. You finish the edit, you get all that done, send over the DRP file, and then they can relink everything super easily on their end, and it's all there. And it kind of just makes that whole process really painless. Whereas depending on how you set up your Final Cut libraries and projects, they can be big and complicated. If you've got rendering turned on, you've used Final Cut, it can be kind of a disaster. So I've always appreciated that with Resolve, just like always being a super small, lightweight file, no matter what. And so, yeah, bouncing project files was pretty common. And then the third one, which you alluded to or hinted at, was the Davinci Resolve Cloud stuff, which I have done and I have used. And it is technically one of the coolest things I've ever worked with from just a pure collaboration standpoint. I mean, it really is not unlike Google Docs, but for editing, where all of your files can be in the cloud. So the client can upload the files, and then in real time in a timeline, you can't both edit and make cuts at the same time, but someone can be cutting and someone can be in that same timeline doing color. And you can also both be in there looking at it as someone's doing it. So just from a pure like cloud perspective, it's fascinating technology and really cool. Even though it is doing a mixture of like cloud and local stuff, it's still not as snappy as just a basic local Davinci Resolve file, which to this day I have still struggled to understand what is happening there. So that kind of takes away a little bit of the experience personally, and it's a little buggier. The cloud version is buggier for whatever reason. It's newer.
Well, a question for you on that side then as well. Yeah. When someone, for example, is color grading while someone is editing, if someone deletes a clip and that person is color grading that clip, is that clip suddenly gone for that person that's color grading the clip?
Yeah, it just depends. And again, I'm trying to think if I've ever had that exact instance. From what I understand, if it was just a cut of the rest of the clips, with remote grading, that grade would still live on basically. So even if it gets put back in, it'll remember that. But yeah, typically, and that's a good point, because like, I guess in most of the situations I've used it, I don't think, other than a few times, there was not a whole lot of overlap. So like, and Dunna was the big person that I did this with, where he would get all the footage in there during the day, and then kind of my time to work was at night, because that's usually when I would carve out hours for him, and I would just edit at night, work on the project. Again, I don't have to save anything, it's just all there. So I just hop in, do the editing, and then depending on how many days or whatever, however long it takes to work on a video, then he would go in and do the color grading, maybe some final audio tweaking, because he's a huge audio nut. And then he would then have it to then render on his side. So usually it was kind of just a nice, easy way to do that without having to bounce project files. But like real time, both being in there at the exact same time, I haven't done that too much. And I don't know that I would seek that out. I'm trying to think, maybe if you're in a movie, like working on a huge project, you would have to, but for YouTube stuff, I don't know if it would be necessary.
I think the only way that would work in a scenario in the future is if it is more like Google Docs or working on some type of Google Cloud system with a team, and you guys are on a call, and you see if someone hits play, it plays the video for everyone, and like type of thing, and everyone could be on the edit live page. But I think that would be a little bit too chaotic, but it might be sick.
Yeah, I think like in general, just as cool as that technology is, and as much as it makes my jaw drop at just like what it's capable of doing, in my experience, it's pretty hard to beat just the local setup, working on your own thing and having that back and forth. I think it's very human, and I think we're kind of fighting a lot of standards and biology to to do this kind of collaborative thing. Because like you've said, I've done edits where I'm like working on stuff and we'll just hop on a FaceTime call, and on FaceTime you can share your screen and they can look at it and it'll be like almost like you've got the director behind you and you're working on stuff, very much like you just said. And it kind of does the same thing, without all the bells and whistles.
Yeah. And I feel like that's like something that could be nice in the future, like if Final Cut implemented, is not having to bounce the project to a YouTuber or to a client, but being able to simultaneously like sort of open the project and have like maybe a notification say like, hey, someone's working on this project right now. They have to close it out first before you can open it. But being able to open the exact same project file anywhere in the world, I could see some really huge benefits with that going in the future. So what was kind of the balance then between, the creator's vision and style to, your own taste of editing style? How did you kind of balance between those two before we start transitioning onto some hot topics like Final Cut versus DaVinci? What was that balance between those two?
I'm here for the hot topics.
I love it.
Yeah, yes, no, that's a great question. It's a tough one. I'll be honest. It's a tough one for me personally, because if you've watched my videos, to whoever's watching this, you know that I definitely like a certain style, which is pretty, and I would say I just
dad jokey.
Yeah, it gets worse and worse. Like it just keeps getting worse, where like the style just keeps getting jankier and sillier. And I just love that. And I'm sure, and lots of people don't, right? Like that's not always their cup of tea. And that is definitely my cup of tea. So I think the biggest thing that I've found is that having my own channel like helped with that, because it's like, okay, there is a place where I can go slap my cutout face on some piece of stock footage and make a joke, right? Like, and that's for me, that's for Jake, and I can do that, and I have a place for that. So even though it's extra work, it's still just like good to have an outlet, and that's what my channel has been lately, is just that outlet for that stuff. And I would say, if you do want to get into editing, I think it is pretty important, and I've definitely struggled with this. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but a big part of being an editor is checking that ego at the door and helping the creator, the director, whoever the case may be, like achieve their vision, right? Which you may not agree with. You may not be aligned with what they want to do. They may want a certain joke here or a certain cut that you're just like, I don't even think that works. And you kind of just have to, I would just say like the biggest skill you can have if you want to be an editor is knowing the creative freedoms you have and knowing when to exercise them, knowing when to stand up for when you think something should be a certain way, but also having the humility to potentially let it go and not, fight for no reason, but voice your thoughts eloquently, say why you think something should be a certain way, get the feedback from the client or whoever, and if they still feel like you're wrong, then just be like, okay, well, it's your video, that's fine, I've said my piece, we'll do it your way. And so I think that's just big, like communication skills, humility, and at the end of the day, it is their video, right? And I think if you're being an editor, that's really important. Now, I have worked in a couple instances, and I do really enjoy it, where someone comes to me and says like, hey, you're 50% of this. I want you to do you, right? Like I've seen what you can do that. And I do really enjoy that. But again, you got to be upfront and know what is the expectation here. Is the expectation that I'm helping you do your video, or are you coming and wanting a mixture? Are you wanting some of my stuff? Or are you wanting me to like completely do it where it's like, hey, here's just the footage, go. I don't even want to talk to you until it's done, and just do your thing, And so I think just talk ahead of time and make sure you know what the expectation is, because each end of the spectrum is very different.
I feel like that's like a big thing that like not a lot of filmmakers who also do editing talk about when they're working on a team, is the kind of criticism and changing things to your edit. Especially it's like when you spend so much time creating something and for someone just to put like a little note on a timestamp, this doesn't look that good, change this, do that, it kind of tears you down if you're not ready for that. Like if you're not
Hmm.
anticipating like the feedback and changes, like oh my gosh, it is not fun sometimes. Like when you're in the initial starting phases of like editing for someone else and doing it professionally, people will kind of rip your thing apart. Now, I know with some people, like whenever I give editing feedback or filmmaking feedback to anyone, what I always like to do is what I call a compliment sandwich, where I give them a compliment, give them some feedback, and then give them another compliment so it feels a little bit better. But some people just like, no, here's all criticism. And you just got to
Hmm.
have that tough skin when it comes to editing, especially when it comes to editing, because people will rip your edits apart. So for you, Jake, what's the biggest version that you've gone to? Like version like V1, V2, V3? What's the highest V number you have reached? I think of my
Oh,
record right now is V14. And at V7 we changed music.
yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
more for commercial client work, not so much YouTube though.
Right. No, I'm trying to think because so I'm really bad at I start V1 or VX or V number starts with um rough draft, right? So like I have rough draft V1 and a whole bunch of numbers, and then final draft V1 with a whole bunch of numbers. And I don't know why I separate those. I couldn't even tell you what the distinction is. It's just like at a certain point, I go, okay, I think this is a rough draft. And then eventually it's like, okay, maybe it'll turn into final draft, or I guess it's probably like however many revisions in. But so I guess if you were to add all of those, yeah, 14 could be close. Yeah, maybe 20. I'm gonna say low end 14, high end like 25 would be my rough estimate.
Yeah, and that's just some reality too. Like sometimes it is. You get to version 7 and the client wants a completely new song, which I
Mhm.
don't think whoever my client that I have had this thing will watch this video, but yes, it happens. And sometimes you
Yeah.
just got to roll with it because at the end of the day, it's like whoever's paying you to do your project, they are paying you for two things. A, your expertise for sure. It's like we're paying you because you are really efficient, you're a pro editor, but we're also paying you because we this is like a commercial we want, or this is a YouTube video we want. So it's like at the end of the day, it's a weird balance and a weird line you have to walk where it's like how much of your creative opinions and your expertise can you give them? And then where is the line of, you know, saying, all right, it's kind of your project and it's like you have the overall final say when it comes to the end of the day. Do you have any more points that you want to give, Jake, before we get into those hot topics? Final Cut versus Davinci Resolve about, being an editor for YouTubers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I just want to drive the point home, kind of what you were touching on there at the last second of just there is such a weird dance working in the creative space and making and creating something, right? And I think that whatever that looks like for you, however you the listener, however that translates to what you are okay with, what you find fulfillment from, like you got to answer to yourself pretty quickly what that is. If you do appreciate utmost true creativity, like you need to find an outlet for it, because I do think you will not succeed as an editor or as a commercial filmmaker or whatever the case may be, right? Like just like you said, there's a place for that, and you need to kind of find within your spectrum of how you create what you're okay with. And we kind of were talking about it off camera, but like I come from like the corporate America world. So like what you were saying with notes and feedback and all of that stuff, like I mean, going into the creative space sometimes just feels like a softball fest because it's just it's like, oh man, this note, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, like we really want to give you notes on this. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. Like I could change that, like that's nothing. Trust me, I've heard a lot worse. And um, yeah, I think just having the self confidence to know what you like, how you want to do it, but then also being humble and executing on what you need to do. So
I love that. Cool. Well, now for the fun stuff, Final
the
Cut.
fun stuff.
Final Cut versus Davinci Resolve, Jake. So you use both, and I mean, I primarily use Final Cut Pro. I have dabbled with Davinci. I've done a lot of coloring work in Davinci, so I know how to do coloring. I'm extremely efficient in Davinci. Editing, Fusion, audio work, I'm a complete noob. I know how to do it to an extent, but like, there's just so many hurdles for me to fully jump to Davinci. But anyways, let's dive right into that. What are your first hot take opinions between, Final Cut versus Davinci Resolve? And then I have a couple specific questions that I want to pick your brain on, why you might choose one over the other.
Heck yeah. No, and I would love to hear questions from you for sure, because I think that'll guide my opinions. In general, I think they're both so good. And in fact, I think I've said this before, I honestly almost hate that I know both as well as I do, because I've reached a point where I know enough about each type of software to see a lot of their strengths. And unfortunately, they're kind of good at a lot of different things. And so unfortunately, a big part of my process right now before I start on an edit is just, what is the most important thing? What is the priority here? What will save me the most time? And which software will be the best for that? And that doesn't mean that I won't round trip stuff and potentially do some things in Resolve and some things in Final Cut, even if I'm picking one as the main one. But it's just like, I'm so big right now on what tool is going to be the fastest, right? So like if I gotta do a multicam, ask,
what is that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but if I gotta do like a multicam edit, like Final Cut is just better at multicam. And I mean, please come in the comments and tell me all of the ways that I'm wrong. I seriously cannot find a way that Resolve does multicam better than Final Cut. And trust me, I've tried. I'm actually doing one right now, and I still just do not feel like it is better.
Well, it's multicam is so nice for Final Cut Pro. I mean, I think that's like any interview setups, all my YouTube videos, even this podcast, I will multicam everything. So it's just a simple 1, 2, and 3, just back and forth. It's night and day. Like it makes life so fast, just being able to cut clips and switch your angles, not having to move anything back and forth, delete. Anyways, continue on. So why would you choose Final Cut?
Totally. Yeah, that would multicam. I love making my shorts in Final Cut. Just that short form, quick turnaround. There's something magical about doing it with the magnetic timeline that I just love. I think ramping. Too, speed ramping. That's a great one. Speed ramping is so much better in Final Cut. Oddly enough, this is a super specific one, but it's one that really matters to me. Face tracking an object in Final Cut right now, after they added the tracking feature, surprisingly magical. Like, it's a weird one, but as we mentioned before, I like to stick my face on stock footage clips, and you can literally drag a picture into the media window, and it automatically recognizes the face. You say, yep, that's the face, tracks it, and then, like, it's done. And it's not that many more steps to do it in Fusion, in Resolve, but it's enough to where if you're doing that a lot, it's better to do it in Final Cut. And I use that all the time.
I know. There's this video I've been like dying just to make on my channel, because it's like there's so many times that I'm working with editors on different projects, and like I'm having to explain like, okay, once I send you this project file, change all your storage locations before you set up a project. Like, go to the project file, go to the settings, change your storage locations, and put it on your hard drive so those storage locations aren't on your computer. Also, obviously, turn off rendering, turn off copying. I think these are so many things that like Final Cut Pro should just have off by default. Yeah. We don't need our projects rendered, and we don't need files to be copied in multiple places, because it makes your computer stupidly slow when you have these certain features and things on. So that's a video I've been wanting to make. What are a couple of other reasons for you?
I think in general, if I don't really, and this, I'm actually getting more away from this recently, which I don't know if that's better or worse, but if I don't know the story or really what I'm going for, I tend to find Final Cut to be my go-to place to play. And the reason being is A, because it's magnetic, it's really easy to shuffle things around, and like you never, well, the bedrock reason is that you don't delete stuff with the magnetic timeline. You can't overwrite stuff. Final Cuts, and again, it's like I know people debate about this all the time, and I just feel that objectively, as an editor, not nuking stuff is the right answer. It is absolutely the right answer that I should be able to move a clip, and instead of overwriting it, it bounces another one. Or if I drag something into the timeline like a sound effect, it just sticks it down below instead of covering something up. And I've had to do so much work in my brain to do the workflow in track-based editing to not do that. That was like, for a while there, I was like doing 3 monitors just to make sure that my timeline was freaking big enough so I could see that I wasn't doing stuff like that.
And it's kind of nice, I feel like, in Final Cut Pro, having like no specific tracks if needed. And I think it's like either Alt or Option S, and it'll automatically sort all your clips based off the rolls, which is also something that's like, oh, if you want to see all your tracks and like organized by their rolls, done. You know?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh my goodness. And then also like in Final Cut Pro, you can also kind of call your clips in the timeline, doing I and O's, and favorite them or assign them specific types of roles, and then highlight all your roles in a media thing and see those roles. And you don't need a cold timeline of your best B-roll or anything like that. It all lives in the timeline itself. And then I also know I created a system for, I know we were just talking about version history. I created something on my Final Cut Pro. So when I snapshot a project, it'll go into an old versions folder in my Final Cut project. And then my current projects, I just rename to V2, V3, V4, and just snapshot it. But it will automatically get sorted for me. So I don't have to physically move things to different folders or do anything like that. Everything's automatic from there.
And that's so beautiful. That's so elegant. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, and then now for Davinci. Why would you choose Davinci over Final Cut?
Yeah, and we kind of had hinted at it earlier. I think really Resolve shines in the fluffier side of things. So again, that bedrock editing. Again, I've reached a point where I do feel pretty confident in both my speed and ability to not nuke stuff in track-based editing. It took years, but I think I'm finally there. So like, as much as I enjoy editing in Final Cut more, like I can do it in Resolve. So if these other things matter, I do a lot of cutting in Resolve, and those other things are professional sound mixing. I mean, again, I talked about my music background, but having Fairlight, which is basically just like a DAW for video, is amazing. I mean, it just feels like you can get clean mixes without any sort of weird compound clip workarounds and trying to like pretend that your rolls are tracks even though they're not, and you have to copy and paste stuff. And the track-based thing for music and sound production is better. And there are things Final Cut could do that would, in my opinion, could be done and still have it be the magnetic timeline. And I don't know why they haven't. Add the ability to have rolls take effects. Like if I could put a compressor on a roll or a limiter on a roll, for F's sake, dude, like give me that apple. I don't know why that doesn't
save
exist.
some of those ideas, because it is a question. That's going to be my next question. So save those ideas of what features. Okay,
I will. So audio mixing for Resolve. Again, anything motion graphics, like I've got some good plugins. Well, one main plugin that I love in Final Cut that helps with smooth animation stuff.
Add motion. You can use this Jake discount.
Add motion. Yeah, Jake. Use code Jakey, baby. But it's not like it's not in Final Cut by default. Like you have to have
Right.
like smooth stuff. So Fusion has that, so that's another big one. Magic
Color
Mask,
masking.
which is color masking, anything color grading, like you talked about it. Like again, Resolve was color grading software before it was editing software. So like anything color grading, like even if you just use it for that, I promise you, you won't hate it. Like it's
Right.
better than any other color grading thing I've ever used, and it's pretty intuitive.
Yeah. And I feel like you can get the same look out of let me rephrase this. You can get the same look for color grading in Final Cut Pro, and the way Final Cut Pro works, if you do color grade, it acts like a node tree, the top to the bottom versus all that. However, though, if it comes to anything more particular, like masking, color masking, doing these magic masks, that's when I feel like, and we're not even talking about doing parallel nodes, doing outside layers, and doing all of that. That's when Davinci Resolve color grading really takes it to that next level. Final Cut Pro, you can get there. Your color can look really good, but that's only if you're doing like the basic thing of color grading. Color boards, color wheels, color curves, transform LUT, hue versus hue, curves, and then maybe a final added look, and that's it. If you're doing the basic bones of color grading, you'll be fine in Final Cut Pro. However, if you're needing to do a lot of mask work, a lot of smarter technology, then Davinci Resolve color grading, it's definitely taking the cake.
Yeah. And I would tell anyone who uses Final Cut, it's a pretty easy workflow to like get the free version of Resolve and start playing around with color grading, because you can take, like, say you edit the whole thing in Final Cut, you can render out that file to ProRes or whatever, import it into DaVinci. It'll automatically cut up that file so that it has all the individual clips, which is really nice. You don't even have to do that. And then you can just grade each of those clips and then render it again. And again, I think like it's a pretty elegant workflow, and I think you talked about using it like, and I'm not a color guy. Like I talk about color like I'm using color, but like there's so much there that I don't even know. But like you said, even for me, like grain, halation, bloom, even just basic stuff like the color wheels like you were talking about, like I don't know why, but I just go into there and I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but okay, I kind of play with this. Okay, I kind of play with that. Like, wait, suddenly like after 5 minutes, this looks way better. And I think it is just scientifically a better tool and is more intuitive for that. So it's pretty cool.
It's just that like it's the unfortunate thing where it's like you need a lot of plugins to make it really, really good. Final Cut Pro on the base level is not the greatest. Like it doesn't even come with adjustment layers. You have to download adjustment layers. I mean, there's a lot of cool tools. However, it's just like you said, getting add motion, getting the adjustment layers, getting different plugins like that can help out. Like even getting motion blur plugins. There's no motion blur effect. You have to get those as adjustment layers or get some type of motion blur effect. Once you get to the point of getting enough stuff where it makes it like, this is great. But it's just the issue is like you have to get to that point eventually.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of work and figuring out and the plugins and like versus I feel like DaVinci Resolve, the big benefit is like everything's just pretty much baked in, ready to go, professional tool. It doesn't take any extra steps. I don't know. No, I know you own a Blackmagic camera. Do you have the B-Raw toolbox for Final Cut Pro?
I do not. No, and I don't shoot B-Raw on my Blackmagic camera for that reason.
See, but that's something so silly. It's like you can't even edit like Blackmagic without a plugin that costs money.
Yeah.
So it's like even the raw capabilities.
Yeah. I love the Pocket 4. Well, maybe, I don't know. I don't love the Pocket 4K, honestly. I finally found a use for it, which is it's my studio camera that just sits in the corner plugged in because it can take a wall plug. So it doesn't even have a battery. And it shoots, because it's in the studio and like all of the lighting is set up and figured out, I shoot ProRes proxy 4K because like I'm not changing anything about the final look because I just have it set up to be how I want it. So yeah,
Yes.
as much as I love Davinci Resolve, I have yet to find one of their cameras that like really has enticed me.
Yeah.
I got sold on the Pocket 4K hype, and I think I got
It's just the Blackmagic cameras are just a weird camera design.
Yeah.
They don't make any sense, like form factor.
Yeah. No, they're
No one wants.
yeah, no one wants them. I don't know. Again, the image is incredible, and that's always
the
been
image is great.
that's always been their like cornerstone. It's like, well, the image is really good and it's cheap, and it's like, okay, like I get that. And if you're like a aspiring DP or camera op or whatever, which again, that's not a world I'm in, so I'm probably using the wrong terms, but like, yeah, that makes sense. Why I bought it, because everyone on YouTube was freaking out about it, I have no idea. I'm so glad I did, because I got Studio Resolve, which kind of kicked off that whole thing. Otherwise I probably wouldn't have. But it's kind of an expensive way to get Studio Resolve.
But it is cool though, because you can get like a speed editor, which costs $300, and you get Davinci Resolve, like two copies of it for free, which would have otherwise cost $300.
Yeah, I for sure would recommend that over a camera right now. But as I'm sure we'll get into, I'm a little Lumix biased. So
okay, of course we're gonna get into it. But finishing kind of like, Final Cut versus DaVinci. The way that I've always seen Final Cut Pro, and you can agree or disagree with me, hopefully agree, but I've always seen Final Cut Pro similar to the iPhones versus Androids topics. Samsung phones are always better than iPhones in terms of camera quality, in terms of features, in terms of like coolness, or not coolness, but in terms of those like capabilities that come on Androids and Samsungs. The thing is, iPhone is always behind, but when they come out with something, it's always 10 times better than what Samsung had to begin with. And that's kind of how I feel Final Cut Pro is like. They're behind, but when they come out with a feature, it always tends to be better, and also in a more simple, effective way.
Yeah.
So, with that said, what features would Final Cut Pro need for Jake to be switching and ditching DaVinci?
Oh, to just say goodbye to DaVinci for forever? Dang, what would it take? Dude, that is such a good question. Holy crap. I've got such a big
plugin for DaVinci Resolve color grading in Final Cut Pro.
Yeah. I mean, for me to be like, I'm never touching Resolve again. Yeah, you would need some way to do some sort of color grading. And again, before I go off on this whole tangent, because I know people are going to freak out and be like, look, there's plugins. We've talked about plugins. Like, plugins exist for a lot of this stuff. I know that. And I've got a lot of them, and a lot of them work great. I've been burned on so many of them. Half of them don't perform well. I've got a stupid expensive computer. Like, it's such a crapshoot on what you're going to get from that, which is why Resolve is great, because it's all built in. And like again, and this is maybe a hot take, but like on my M2 Max, like I think Resolve performs better for me right now than Final Cut, like just day to day, like chopping, playback. Like, it's stupid how optimized it is for Apple Silicon. But to circle back to your question, I would say I need DaVinci Resolve color grading, because even though I don't do a lot of it, there's still enough that matters, and I would need that. You're gonna need to give me the ability to have roll-based tracks somehow. I've got to be able to put a compressor and change the levels on a whole roll. So like if I've got my sound effects roll, I want to be able to kind of process it somewhat together without making a big compound clip that's convoluted and yucky and gross.
Yeah. But that seems like a great feature and an easy feature they could easily add.
I've tried to like pick apart why they wouldn't do that, and I still have not come up with a good reason, because
I can easily imagine like you hit Option S, your rolls or whatever that is, drops all down, and you just click whatever that thing is, and it edits, like says like selected 12 clips, and you can edit all of that simultaneously.
Yeah. And in Logic, which is track based, which is another Apple product, like there's tracks where, you're adding compressors to tracks, or buses where you're adding it to a group of tracks. And yeah, I just don't know why that doesn't exist. And there's so many times where I feel like I'm leaving about 5% on the table in a Final Cut mix because I can't quite affect the whole group in such a way to really dial in some of that stuff without, again, going through some of those headaches. And it's like, this is a YouTube video. It's not worth it. Like, we're shipping it. So that's a big one. I would love a native, like, Magic Mask type thing. I've got a plugin that works all right, but it totally tanks performance. And I would think Apple could probably make something like that that's pretty well optimized, because you can click your photos on your phone and it cuts out stuff. Like, they've got the tech. So like, I would love to see that, because I would miss that big time if I didn't have that in Resolve. And then just give me the ability to curve some keyframes in Final Cut. I know that's what motion is for, but
Right.
just give me that.
I know it's pretty bad. Anytime I do any graphic work that I need to animate a logo, I'll just make a Final Cut Pro project file, animate it all in Final Cut Pro, because I'm just like, motion is too confusing to figure out.
Yeah.
I'll just edit this in Final Cut and keyframe it.
Yeah. And I don't think it links. Again, I haven't used it near enough to talk about it, but it's not an easy back and forth from what I can tell, or it
Right.
should be easier, but
Yeah. And I feel like
Yeah.
it would also be great just from a workflow perspective if inputting LUTs into projects could be specific for a project. So if you want to input a LUT, you can just import it and you don't have to go to the folder and have it like a LUT folders and have a bunch of random different LUTs. And like that part I feel like is really annoying, because like from doing 2 years in Premiere Pro at a company, which was awful, that was a nice thing to do, was to be able to LUT stuff and not have like a pivot, like a drag and drop, like how Final Cut Pro works, where it's like you have all your LUTs available, but if you want to make a custom LUT for something specifically in DaVinci to Final Cut Pro, that would be also a really nice, easier workflow in terms of color grading.
Yeah, that would be epic.
Man.
For sure. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, if you could give me those, I think I could get over like anything else that's in the small category personally. Because again, oh my gosh, I just thought of another one. The transcription feature in DaVinci that they just added is actually incredible. It's actually incredible, and Apple could totally do this as well. Like, the technology is out there, but the fact that I can transcribe these 1.5 hour long. So for me, like, the biggest selling point is, I've got my podcast episodes. When I get done and I want to make shorts out of it, I transcribe the whole thing, and as I'm editing it, I'll take notes. And so then I just pull up my notes and I look for parts that I had typed in, and I go, oh, that would be a good clip. And it takes me 3 seconds to find, because I can just search for it in the transcription feature. And it's like so good.
No, that's such an upsetting thing that also Final Cut does not have auto captions. Like, built in, obviously, again, you can get plugins, but then they don't work great.
Yep.
It's like the most annoying thing ever. I mean, I think that's like the style that I specifically love. I feel like you need to call it, I think you just need to have some type of editing style called like Jake Daddy editing or something.
Yes.
Something like that along those lines.
Dude, I'm stealing that. I'm taking that forever.
For it.
Jake Daddy editing.
Do you remember the episode you did trying to use DaVinci Resolve's captions, but in Final Cut Pro with add motion?
Yes. Dude, such a janky solution, but it works so good.
It did. But I think I watched that one scene of you celebrating, like, when you turn to the camera and say, we did it. And it's like you're celebrating and you're like, oh yeah, baby. And all of that is like what I think I love so much about your editing style. Ooh.
Dude, thank you so much.
I love this.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. No, and it's all genuine, because I was literally like so psyched because I had this idea, and I can't even remember Like, I was probably in the shower or something, and I was just like, holy crap, no one else is probably thinking of this because it's the dumbest thing I've ever thought. But what if you could, like, because really with captions in Final Cut, like the hard part is typing. And I don't know if like you have this issue, but half the time I go up to work on a title and it doesn't, I'll even double click and get the text highlighted and like it's all ready to go. And then I'll start typing and then it just starts taking off with all my hotkeys. Stuff starts getting cut, things are flying everywhere. And I'm just like, wait. Command Z, Command Z.
And it's like all the shortcuts that are
Yes.
in Final Cut Pro. And there's a lot. There's
Yeah.
so much. I don't use this anymore because I have most of this memorized by this point in my life. But like, yeah, if you're typing, all of these shortcuts get activated for some reason at times if your text isn't perfectly highlighted.
And I don't know. Yeah, it's like I don't know what I'm doing wrong because, and usually it is just like I've got to like make sure it's highlighted, really make sure it takes, and then type. And that process is so slow, even though I love, again, we're add motion shilling like crazy. The animation that they have for stuff popping up is beautiful. And so I was like, gosh, if I could like cut out the typing part and then just go through and cut up a text or a video clip that has all of the text on a green screen and just have it pop up.
I feel like that would be nice. And then also being able to like edit your text position. Like if you had multiple different text layers in Final Cut Pro, be able to, in the editing timeline, not in like the timelines, but on the browser, being able to move the text. So click on this, if it moves this, click on this, moves this, sort of like Canva, where you can just click, drag. But it's so annoying because like you move this and then you have to go down to the timeline, click your thing, go back up, move it. Oh,
yeah,
it's a hassle. It's just a
that would be amazing.
All right, and now let's sort of transition to the last topic here.
Okay.
Jakey, Snakey.
Snake, dude, I'm sorry. You're getting me all worked up on all these things, and I keep talking.
I know, I love it. Hey, that's great. Lumix. You've been a
Let's
Lumix
talk
fanboy.
about Lumix, baby. I'm a huge Lumix fanboy.
You're
a huge Lumix fanboy.
I am. I think I was interesting because you were ahead of me in making Lumix videos before I started. And now you went all editing, which is great. And then I'm just still going crazy on Lumix. But you used to make all content about Lumix cameras back in the day.
I did.
What happened?
Well, yeah, like we talked about, I kind of lost the time. Yeah, just kids. And again, like I think I'm kind of getting back into it. I think like my first camera was the G7, right? Like that old 2015 it was a killer camera. And I sold it to a family member, and then I went and bought it back from him because A, I wanted it for nostalgia purposes, but then B, dude, that camera with the little 15 mil, it has a flash. That is the best family camera. It's like it's like plastic. It weighs like nothing. I can throw it on my neck.
I'm about to sell you on a new family camera right now. Literally
dude,
right
sell
now
me.
as we speak.
But I love that G7, like, and I put a little Pro Mist on it. It looks like I'm shooting like Fuji stuff. Ooh, what is that?
So, like disposable cameras?
Yeah.
This is a digital disposable camera.
Okay, how?
So it looks like disposable like cameras as you take a picture, but there's no screen. I'm going to show my camera. There's no screen. It's just a screen counter. And you just take a photo and then you plug it in via USB-C and you can get your photos and they look like vintage disposable photos.
What brand is it?
It's called Camp Snap. It's like $70.
Okay. I'm going to have to buy one of these. That looks so fun.
It's so sick. I did like an entire date night on this. I wanted to take this because I'm going out of the country and I wanted a disposable camera.
Dude,
and
that's awesome.
Digital. You can clear the photos and use it forever.
No, that is super cool. I'm gonna grab one of those for sure.
And they come in a bunch of different colors. So red, brown, yellow, pink, green, blue. But wow, G7 is a great camera.
Yeah, and it was man, it was so good at the time. It's still great. I mean, again, I don't not that I use it for video anymore because obviously it's way outdated, but for photos, like it still holds up. Throw a Pro Mist filter on there and it totally gives, it's got the vibe that we all love. It's throwing the vibes and it's just super compact. And
been trying to purchase a G7 again. but I don't want to spend more than like $200 on it because I'm like, I don't need this. I just want it for nostalgic.
Yeah, it's just for fun. Totally. No, and that's why I'm so glad that I like had the family member, because I was like, hey, I know I sold this to you, but like, do you use it? Could I buy it back from you? What would you want? Like, again, it's mostly just to like one day be like, hey, this was my first camera, and I was kind of sad that I had sold it. So yeah, I mean, I bought that, started YouTubing on that. And again, like I'm trying to think, I've pretty much only been Lumix forever since that purchase, because I've just really loved the value statement.
Yeah.
I'm a frugal boy. I'm really big on not spending unnecessary money. So obviously they've appealed to me throughout the years. And yeah, I had a G7, then bought a G9, which I love the G9. After the G9, bought a GH5S. Absolutely loved that camera. Felt like it still wasn't fancy enough, and bought in with all the hype and bought a Pocket 4K, which was cool because it was still Micro Four Thirds, so it kind of fit. But even though it wasn't Lumix, again, we finally found a home for that camera, but I really did not like that camera. Took a brief side detour getting sold on all the full frame hype and bought an A7 III, which for photography to this day I still love. I would honestly buy that camera again for photos. I just couldn't figure out the video. Like, again, I'm not a colorist, and it was 8-bit. I never felt like I could get the color look decent, whereas on the GH5S it was like, no, this is easy. So then I bought the S5.
Has Vlog L?
Yeah.
Right?
It does.
Yeah.
Well,
and then,
no, I think it might have had regular Vlog, like the full thing, because that was kind of what made it the S, right? Is I think it had full Vlog, and it was it was a weird camera, no IBIS, 12 megapixels, so it had big pixels, but it was a really nice looking camera, and I kind of wish I hadn't sold that one too for a myriad of reasons. Very light, very small. Then I bought the S5. And I was definitely one of the early adopters on that camera, right? Because that was around Canon and Sony had pretty much, like Canon and Sony had caught up. You could get 10-bit, you could do all these things that Lumix was kind of known for being like, hey, we're budget. We don't have autofocus. Autofocus sucks, but like we've got everything else and it's cheap. So stick with Lumix. And I was like, okay, and the S5 came out, and I was like, you know what? At the time, I was like, autofocus really isn't that important to me. I miss Vlog. I'm used to the colors, and I wanted full frame for photos because I love that with the A7 III. Again, I'm a sucker for that look. I'd buy a medium format camera if they weren't $1 gazillion. Like, I love it. We're all suckers for that. It's fine. So I bought the S5, sold everything else. So it was just the S5 and the Pocket 4K. And then really held out for a very long time, telling myself I didn't need autofocus. And just recently, we're filming on it right now, I bought the S5 II.
God, I was messaging you on Instagram.
I bought it. Yeah, I bought it.
I know.
So I got it.
You didn't use my Amazon affiliate link.
I know. I totally messed that up. I got so excited that I just like went and ripped one before I told you, because I was like, you know what? He talked me into it. I'm doing it. And then I didn't even think to ask you for an affiliate link. But dude, I mean, now honestly, like this camera with the kit lens, the 20-60, I honestly think it truly is, like, if you were to draw the Venn diagram of like cost, quality, size, performance, versatility, features, like I really think it is the middle of all of that, because it's not, it's one of the cheaper options, but the autofocus is really good. It's way better than the A7 III was, which is cool, because that's what used to be my gold standard, which wasn't that good. And then it's got all the other features, and for the first time in a long time, which is hilarious because that's kind of why I've been into editing, I'm like actually having fun filming again, which is great because it's making me be more creative with my editing content. But it's like, wow, I can just like frame up this shot and just rip it. And it looks good, like I don't have to worry about like focus and stuff, which I didn't realize how much I actually was frustrated with that piece.
S5 II and the 2X is like the best YouTuber camera like right now.
Yeah.
Like would it be nice that it didn't have 4K 60 crop? Sure, but like honestly, like you have a 24-70, it's not even that big of a deal. It's
Hmm.
honestly so nice. And like the only things that like obviously I would want in like a next Lumix camera is from more of a professional filmmaking perspective. Like open gate 60 frames a second for B-roll for client work would be great, but like for YouTube, 24 and 30 frames a second open gate is like killer. Like
So killer.
gold standard. I mean, I always end up reframing myself almost 80 to 90% of the time anyways, depending how I
Hmm.
want my footage to look, but I'm stoked that you got the camera.
Dude, I am
I'm
too.
stoked. But it is
It's
interesting,
magical.
like I don't know what your autofocus settings were prior to the S5 II. I always did center of the frame focus, and then if I had human detection on, and that's how I'm still doing it. I don't know if that's the best way to do your focus. That's just how like the best way to do your focus on all contrast based systems. So I assume it was going to continue being the best, and it works probably 98% of the time for me. So that's how I do it. But I haven't even experimented too much on
No,
all the
because you don't
autofocus
have to.
settings.
Because it's just good.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. I think yeah, I switched it. I think what you said is what I'm using, where like it's center frame, but then it'll
Yeah.
find the face if it's in the frame. And I mean, again, it's not perfect. Like I think I even posted something and Patrick Tomaso was like, "Oh, I watched it bounce like 3 times to the background." I'm like, "Yeah, dude, but like you've like I know you've reviewed the S5. You used to use the S5. The S5 would just like you'd be filming a talking heads with literally nothing going on, and then suddenly like it's out of focus for no
Right.
reason, where it's like when this goes out of focus, I kind of look at the frame and I go, yeah, I can see why maybe it got confused there, but like for anything reasonable, it's stupid good.
Right. And I think it's so sick because Lumix put so many like video features, like focus limiting as well. Of like, okay, this is
Hmm.
like the focus area and distance it can go. So if you really wanted to stop that, you can make the focus be here instead of here. So it only can go back and forth in this small area. But since Lumix, pit some of these amazing focus tools to assist older cameras that were on contrast based autofocus, it just kind of made this focusing system, these video tools, these video features on this new camera like so much better than
Yeah.
like other cameras and other camera systems. I honestly feel like if you're invested into Sony, you're probably fine. You could stay with Sony. If you're
Yeah.
invested into Canon, what I've heard from a lot of other creators is like it's been a good time to start jumping ship from Canon, especially if you are looking to upgrade, you want to switch systems. Lumix seems like they're kind of like the one starting to slowly catch up and then hopefully take the lead with the next full frame iterations of cameras that hopefully will be coming out sometime soon because it's been 5 years since the last full frame camera. So hopefully soon,
Yeah,
the next full frame camera.
for sure. But again, it's so funny because it's like I don't I mean, maybe stuff will change again, but like, especially because at least for YouTube, like slow motion is not in anymore. Like, I don't know. I honestly don't know what you would need to put in a camera to like get me to upgrade from this one. They'll think of something. I'm sure they will. It'll come out. But like, I like for a long time, and same like before Apple Silicon, there were so many things where I would sit there and go like, man, I really need this. This would really change my day. But I've like reached this point where I'm kind of looking around, just going like, man, I don't even know what I would want. Like, surprise me. I'm happy to be surprised. Like, let me be a consumer and blow my mind. But like, as of right now, I'm struggling to like reach. Whereas before, it was like reaching was easy. It was like, God, get me autofocus. God, make it so I don't have to make proxies or, whatever. And now it's like, oh, I got those things.
For the YouTuber, there's really much more you need from a camera that you couldn't get out of the S5 II or the S5 IIX. For
Yeah.
the filmmaker, I feel like there's a lot more. Obviously, no crop 60, open gate 60 frames a second, maybe 4K 120. Internal NDs would be great.
Yeah.
But that's like I feel like is for the filmmaker, and then for the YouTuber, the S5 II, S5 IIX is like the perfect YouTube hybrid camera.
for sure. Yeah, that's true. I would take some internal NDs. I'm not gonna lie about that. But I've got so many ND filters, screw-on filters that, I'm not like that one at this point I'm in financially. So like as much as I
Right.
would take the solution, I've already the solution exists in my hands, so it's not quite as much of a detriment. But okay,
But
yeah, no, I agree. I was gonna ask you,
okay.
so like right now with the S5 II, like and again it just feels silly, but I'm just like obsessed with the kit lens. Like what's your obsessed lens right now on your
Oh,
S5
right
II?
now it's 3 lenses actually. If I had to boil it down, I could boil it down to 1 lens, and then I have my favorite other 2. But my number 1 lens I've been using actually is the 24-70 f2.8 Lumix Pro lens.
Okay.
Oh, that lens is a beaut. It looks so nice. It's so versatile.
Yep.
I don't know if it's made me more lazy though as a filmmaker, because it's like cool.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but then for interviews, I do own a 24, 35, 50, and 100 mil prime lenses. I specifically
Mm.
use the 35 and 50 for client interviews. So what I'll typically do is I'll put it on my 24-70, frame my shot, figure out the focal length I like between all of my different prime lenses on the zoom lens, and then I'll switch to a prime lens so I can go down to like an f 2.2 or an f2 just to get a little bit more bokeh in the background. So my go-to lens right now, 24-70, that's the golden charm. The second
Yep.
one is I just recently got this prime lens, and this is my favorite YouTube lens, is a 24 f1.8. Oh,
Yep.
that's a beaut. Oh, I'm also crying right now because I just realized I was on f2.8 this entire time instead of an f1.8. Oh,
Sad day.
woo! This
As
is
I'm
like
on
my
F3.5
I
on
love,
the
well,
kit
so
lens,
my
just like
issue is how
going.
big is your shed editing space?
12 feet. So I've got a little bit of depth, which I lean into. Plus, again, with that 20 mil, it's like such a good. It's perfect. That's the
Right.
thing. That's why I love that kit lens. Is the 20 mil sells me. Like, I think I would like the 24-70, except for it's not quite wide enough and it's too big. I really love small lenses. Obviously, I've got the micro four thirds background, so but I have used that 24-1.8 lens, and well, I own that lens, and other than it just not being quite wide enough, I love that lens.
Yeah. So the 24, I feel like, is like my sweet spot. I have a 4x4 feet office space with a dresser right here, with, my desk right here. So really, the reality is I only have like maybe 3 feet of room to play with. And my
Yeah.
background is literally, I can touch my background with ease. So my issue is I need a lens, and it's so ironic because I forgot to switch my aperture before we started recording to an f1.8, just so I can allow as much bokeh in the background as possible.
Yeah.
But I just made so many, YouTube filmmaking errors today. That's horrendous.
Dude,
It's
that's life.
horrendous.
That's life.
And then the last one is a new lens they just sent out, which is the 28-200
Mm,
f4.1 to f7, I think.
yeah.
The focal aperture change isn't crazy drastic, and it's super smooth. However, with that lens, I don't see that as a professional use lens, but that lens, in my sense, almost made it feel like I could replace my Micro Four Third cameras with it,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
That's
it's
the
like
thing. Yeah.
it's such a small versatile lens, and that lens is the exact same size as the kit lens, the 20-60. So it's so small. Is the aperture great? No, but if you use that lens for the focal length, you're using it for travel, it's a great lens. It
Yeah.
makes me want to use the S5 IIX as a travel camera instead of a filmmaking camera, because of how versatile that lens is.
Yeah.
So those are my 3 lenses. Yeah.
Yeah. No, those are all great picks. And that I haven't used the 28-200 yet, but it looks very interesting. And yeah, I mean, like from a practicality standpoint, I don't enjoy changing aperture or whatever it's called, where the aperture changes on a lens. Like, it's just kind of inconvenient, but like, if you've got your ISO and all your exposure controls on different dials, like, it is kind of annoying because you got to adjust stuff. But also, like, with dual native ISO, like, unless you're shooting at night, like, you can get away with like f5.6, you could shoot pretty dark these days and it doesn't look that bad. So yeah, it's,
You can always change it to that 7 or 7.1, whichever one it is, and have a consistent, constant aperture from, your 28 to 200. It's a
yeah,
f7. So take that with a grain of salt. But I think coming from that Micro Four Third world where it's what's that? An f4, or technically I guess an f3.5. It looks like the bokeh looks like an f7 as is. The light is an f3.5, but the bokeh in full frame terms looks like an f7. So it's not that big of a difference, or not a huge selling point, but as kind of a fun travel camera, it looks great. It looks killer.
For sure.
But yeah. Well, cool, man. Well, I appreciate you joining this episode of the Lumix Creators Podcast and sort of landing the plane here.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people that are trying to figure out what they want to do on YouTube, or just trying to figure out what they want to do with creatively? I know you went through a lot of different phases with Lumix, with Sony too, with just kind of reviewing camera gear, and then kind of going to the music phase, and now finding your place in sort of the editing post-production phases. What advice would you give someone that is just trying to figure out what type of content they might want to create on YouTube?
I think at the end of the day, and it's so cheesy and so corny and not really that exciting, but I think you just gotta, like, again, and I think I've kind of said it before, but you gotta do what your heart, what is speaking to your heart is definitely what I would recommend to follow. Because at the end of the day, like, the internet is so fickle. The algorithms are so fickle. Like, I've made so many videos to very small numbers of people. I was going to say silence, but I don't agree with that, because anyone is everyone, and 100 views could change your life. Like, that's a true statement. But in the grand 30,000 foot view of the internet, that is a pretty quiet dent, right? So point being, you got to love it. You have to find something that you genuinely enjoy, because the minute you have to force it is the minute you won't last. And I think too, along that lines, like, just experiment, find things in life that excite you. And a lot of times that usually means finding them not hooked to the internet itself. It does sometimes, in my case, I think that was part of it. But I think just finding things that you could do without people singing you praise or hitting the like button, I think is the big thing, right? And again, I think too, embracing that can change. Like, not always like I think right now editing is my North Star, but I mean, and I don't know if I've said it to anyone else, but I'll say it to you, like, I am not convinced that will be the rest of my life. It might be. There's a pretty good chance. So far from what I've seen, this one feels like the brightest star I've followed in a long, long time. But I'm not trying to hold myself to that, because I've switched in the past, like you've talked about. And it's because I just have lots of interests. And I think as human beings, that's pretty natural.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think I might just actually cut the podcast there, because I think that was an amazing answer. I mean, last thing I feel like I could just echo what you said is, like, make videos that you're passionate about making, and like, tomorrow you can make 100 videos about it and not have anyone watch it, but just be stoked about making that content. I feel like when you find that, that's when you're in the right niche of what content you want to make.
Yep, totally.
Cool. Well,
and
thanks,
maybe even the better
continue,
quick, maybe even the better cherry to put on top too is, like, I think for a long time, and I think a lot of people, like, I guess maybe I would say, like, obviously you want to do it without knowing that people would like it, but maybe the real important thing to say is, think of who it would be for. and keep those people in mind, right? Like I think like my super silly style, I know there are people out there who will enjoy that because I like that, right? Maybe it's not the trend, maybe it's not what people will recommend, maybe it'll never be trendy enough for people to find it easily, but it can be found. And I think that that's also important too, is like your people that you enjoy and who you want to make laugh or impress or whatever the case may be. Like I think those people exist, and maybe they're not in your view now, but I would say like that's another thing to think about, is like your friend group, right? Like in real life, like what do you do there that maybe the internet doesn't seem to think is important? And I think that that's kind of part of it as well. So
Awesome. Well, Jake,
anyway,
where can everyone find you on YouTube, on Instagram? Where's all the good places to check out?
I would say the one I really care about is just my YouTube channel, which is Jake Felzen, JakeFelzien. And yeah, we're about all things editing over there. I've got Instagram, I've got Threads and TikTok, but those all just push you back to YouTube anyway. So YouTube is where I would prefer to send people.
Awesome. Well, thanks, brother, for joining me on this episode. Anyways, I'm so thankful for Jake hopping on to my podcast. If you want to check out all of his work, the links will be in the description below. And if you want to see me talking to another Lumix creator, check out that video right here. And YouTube recommends you might like this video right here. Until the next one, guys, peace.